She was simply a mother driving her son home. Then, without warning, a racist officer brutalized her, slamming her to the ground and rendering her boy unconscious. What they didn't foresee, however, was that her husband was a former U.S. Marshal. And he doesn't just knock, he storms. Stay with us because this time justice doesn't merely whisper, it roars. Dear viewer, what you're about to witness isn't just a narrative. It's a profound testament to the unyielding pursuit of justice in corners often overlooked. If this is your first time joining us, I extend a warm invitation to share your location in the comments below. And if stories like this resonate with you, challenge your perceptions, or provoke thought, please consider subscribing and hitting the bell icon. We champion voices that demand to be heard every single day. Thank you for being here. Now let's delve into their story. It began with a shortcut, a routine decision made in the comfort of familiarity. Dana Brooks had traversed that stretch of Magnolia Highway in Charleston, South Carolina, countless times. It was her trusted route to get herself and her son, Miles, home from basketball practice before dusk settled. She appreciated its spaciousness, its tranquility, and how it paralleled the wetlands, with trees forming a protective arch overhead. But on this particular night, as a gentle breeze rustled through the pines and the distant chorus of cicadas filled the air, that familiar road transformed into a perilous path in an instant. Dana was laughing at something Miles had said, his duffel bag slightly ajar in the back seat, the lingering scent of sweat and Gatorade. That fleeting, ordinary moment was the last time anything felt normal. Blinding red and blue lights erupted behind her. A lone cruiser, no siren, just those pulsating lights, a silent harbinger. Dana instinctively decelerated and pulled to the side, her pulse quickening, but she suppressed the rising fear. It's probably nothing, she reassured herself, hands firmly at 10 and 2. She was accustomed to these encounters, far too accustomed. The car door slammed before the patrol vehicle fully stopped, heavy boots striking the asphalt. She caught his face in the side mirror. White, late 40s, a thick jaw and determined stride. A second officer emerged, younger, quieter. He glanced at Miles, then at Dana. He hesitated, but only for a second. The eerie silence hung heavy. I want my phone, Dana demanded. Let me call my husband. No phones, the first officer barked. You don't get to call anyone. But Miles had already reacted, swift and scared. He snatched Dana's phone from the console. The younger officer shouted for him to drop it. Dana screamed, "He's a kid. Don't you dare touch him." The first officer lunged for Miles, rough and forceful. It unfolded so rapidly that Dana's heart nearly seized. Her son's body slammed to the ground, his head striking the pavement with a sickening thud. She let out a scream, loud, raw, primal. Her son didn't move. That was the moment something inside Dana shattered. The second officer recoiled, his gaze fixed on the boy, the unnatural twist of his arms, the blood now spreading beneath his head. He looked at his partner, and for the first time fear flickered in his eyes. Maybe we should call it in, he murmured. The first officer whirled on him. You shut your mouth. The ensuing silence was interminable, broken only by the faint hum of Dana's smartwatch vibrating on her wrist. One press. Emergency override. Her husband's face flashed onto the screen for a half-second before the officer ripped it off and hurled it to the ground. Too late. Across town, in a modest Charleston home, U.S. Marshal Anthony Brooks was washing dishes when the emergency ping hit his phone. His wife's location and an alert, then silence. He dried his hands slowly, deliberately, not with panic but with precision. Years of training clicked into place, like a meticulously assembled puzzle. He reached for his badge, then his weapon. The Brooks family had remained anonymous for too long, quiet, respectable, hardworking. But that night on Magnolia Highway, someone had chosen the wrong family to brutalize, the wrong woman to dehumanize, the wrong child to harm. And the nation would soon discover precisely what unfolds when a black mother is assaulted in front of her son, and her husband is a man honed to hunt injustice for a living. This wasn't a mistake, it was a message. But Anthony Brooks had a message of his own, and he was already en route. Anthony Brooks didn't drive like a man consumed by vengeance. He drove like a man who had done this before. His eyes darted between lanes, ears attuned to every shift in engine pitch, his body held in controlled readiness as the marshland blurred past his windshield. He wasn't just a husband on a mission. He was a trained operative stepping back into a world he thought he'd left behind. The address ping from Dana's emergency beacon had ceased 10 minutes after the initial signal, but it was enough. He had coordinates, a timestamp, and a justification no man should ever have to find. He didn't require sirens. He didn't need a uniform. What Anthony needed was clarity, and he possessed it. Meanwhile, back on that stretch of Magnolia Highway, the scene had devolved into pandemonium. The older officer, Sergeant Clay Delmont, paced in a wide arc, attempting to control the narrative as he radioed in a distorted account of events. His voice faltered as he spoke into dispatch, asserting Dana had resisted arrest, that Miles had become aggressive, and that force was regrettably necessary. Yet he kept glancing down at the motionless boy on the pavement, and with each look his facade cracked. Sweat beaded on his brow. If guilt was unfamiliar to him, fear certainly wasn't. The younger deputy, Officer Brent Holloway, stood off to the side, pale and visibly shaken. His hand trembled near his holster, though he made no move to draw it. What he had witnessed, what he had permitted, now played on a loop in his mind. Dana, still cuffed, blood smeared along her cheekbone, had fallen silent, not from weakness but from something deeper. The look she gave him wasn't pleading, nor was it even hate. It was colder than that. It was knowing. Knowing that she wouldn't forget. Knowing that someone, her husband, would remember every single detail. When Anthony arrived, he made no sound. He parked down the road, lights off, and moved through the tree line like a specter. His training had taught him how to vanish in plain sight. He observed from cover, assessing the scene. 2 officers, 1 cruiser, no backup. Miles still unresponsive, Dana bleeding but alive. Every detail clicked into place with brutal clarity. He counted his breaths. 1, 2, 3. Then he stepped into the light. The gravel crunched beneath his boots, drawing the officer's attention. Delmont turned first, instinctively reaching for his belt. "Sir, this is a restricted." Anthony held up his badge, the U.S. Marshal emblem gleaming in the cruiser's headlights. "Step away from my wife." Delmont's words caught in his throat. You can't interfere with an active investigation." "I just did." Anthony's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It was the voice of a man who had faced war zones, cartels, terrorists, and now a small-town bully in uniform. He walked past Holloway, who neither stopped him nor even blinked. Anthony knelt beside Miles, gently pressed 2 fingers to his neck and exhaled. There was a pulse, weak but present. He looked up at Dana, her eyes locked on his. She didn't speak, but her body sagged in visible relief. She was no longer alone. Anthony stood slowly, deliberately. He turned to Delmont. "You put hands on my wife. You knocked my son unconscious. You violated civil rights, used excessive force, and fabricated cause. Do you know what happens when you do that to the wrong family?" Delmont stuttered, his arrogance unraveling. "We had probable cause." "No," Anthony countered. "You had power and you abused it. But your badge doesn't protect you from the truth." Anthony stepped forward, close enough that Delmont flinched. "You made a mistake tonight, a big one. But the bigger mistake? Thinking this would go unseen." From his pocket, Anthony produced a small recording device. It had been running since the moment he stepped from the car. And tucked under Dana's seat, as was her habit, was a dash cam, silently recording the entire incident. He had more than enough. Delmont blanched. "You can't save it for the court." Officer Holloway spoke for the first time. "He told me to back his story. Said we'd say she got aggressive, that the kid jumped at us." Anthony turned to him, his tone measured. "Are you going to testify to that?" I think I need a lawyer." "No," Dana said hoarsely, finally finding her voice. "What you need is a conscience." Within minutes, paramedics arrived. Anthony had called them en route, using a secure federal frequency that bypassed local dispatch. Miles was loaded into an ambulance, stabilized, still unconscious but breathing. Dana rode with him, her hand clutched to his. Before the doors closed, she looked at Anthony one last time. "Make sure they don't bury this." "I will." By dawn, the story had already begun to surface. Anthony had sent the footage to an old contact in D.C., someone he trusted, someone who still owed him a favor. In less than 12 hours, the video of Dana's unlawful detainment and Miles's assault would go viral. But more importantly, the Internal Affairs Division of the Department of Justice would have it. Not the sheriff's department, not local politics. The feds. What Delmont didn't know was that Anthony wasn't just any U.S. Marshal. He had once been part of a special task force trained to dismantle systems of corruption and bring down powerful men who believed themselves untouchable. And now, that training would be deployed for his family. In Charleston, word spreads quickly, but justice, true justice, often moves slowly. Anthony didn't care. He wasn't chasing a headline, he was chasing accountability. And he would persist until everyone involved was exposed. Because they hadn't merely hurt Dana, they had tried to silence her. They hadn't merely struck Miles, they'd struck the future. And when you break the wrong family, you don't just create a victim, you create a movement. Anthony Brooks had always known that justice in America didn't always favor the righteous. He had witnessed it firsthand in war zones and border towns, behind closed courtroom doors where truth was traded for political convenience. But this, what had happened to Dana and Miles, was no longer just injustice. It was a deliberate attempt to erase truth. And Anthony knew if he didn't fight smart, they'd bury everything before the first sunrise. The hospital was quiet, save for the constant rhythmic beeping of machines monitoring Miles's vitals. Dana hadn't left his side since the ambulance doors opened, her fingers resting gently on his hand, her eyes fixed on his face, willing him to wake. Nurses came and went, whispering with reverence, already aware of who they were and what had transpired. The security outside his room, however, wasn't provided by the hospital. It was federal. Anthony made sure of that. But even as his son lay unconscious and his wife bore the bruises of injustice, Anthony didn't rage. He moved like a man sharpening a blade, precise, cold, and focused. Back at their home, he pulled an old safe from beneath the floorboards, a secret even Dana didn't know he still possessed. Inside, a laptop built for secure communication, encrypted drives, and backup files from his days as a federal investigator. Anthony never believed in coincidences. He knew that what happened on Magnolia Highway wasn't a random stop. It was calculated. And people like Sergeant Clay Delmont didn't act alone. He started where most people wouldn't think to look. Personnel files. Through a private portal still active from an old Marshal's network, he accessed the regional database. What he discovered was startling. Clay Delmont had been named in 4 previous excessive force complaints, all quietly settled, no charges filed. Officer Brent Holloway had only been with the department 18 months, but he had already worked under 3 different supervisors, each with internal misconduct citations. But that wasn't the worst of it. Anthony found an internal memo buried deep within the county's shared drives. It referenced a community enforcement initiative called Silent Guard, a supposedly volunteer-based auxiliary patrol team created to support understaffed officers in minority-dense neighborhoods, funded through local business grants and donations. It was cloaked in community language, but to Anthony's trained eyes, it was a backdoor paramilitary unit. And Clay Delmont? He was listed as the coordinator. The deeper Anthony dug, the more disturbing the picture became. There were patrol maps, color-coded overlays of neighborhoods flagged for enhanced observation. Most of them black, low-income areas with a particular focus on households labeled as civic agitators. A separate log flagged Dana's name, with a citation of her recent community board complaint over school zoning changes. The file was dated 3 days before the traffic stop. That was no coincidence. The so-called hit-and-run excuse given during her arrest? A fabrication. There were no open incidents that night involving a black SUV. Anthony confirmed that through state patrol records. It was a cover story. They'd needed an excuse to stop her, to scare her, to silence her. And they thought no one would ever trace it back. He forwarded everything to his old contact, Special Agent Mendes, an honest man at the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. Mendes didn't ask questions. He only replied, "I'm on it. Be ready." Back at the hospital, Dana stepped into the hallway for the first time in hours. Her face was pale, her jaw tight. "He hasn't woken up yet," she said, her voice unwavering, but Anthony could hear the pain. "He will," Anthony said, "and when he does, I want him to know we fought for him every second." Dana nodded slowly, but there was more in her eyes. Fear. "They're already spinning it," she whispered. Local news ran a segment saying I was combative, that Miles rushed the officers. Anthony clenched his fists. That narrative dies tomorrow. He turned his laptop toward her, showing her the surveillance footage he had retrieved from a gas station 2 blocks before the stop. A private business with an angle on the road. Their SUV had passed it, and in the background the cruiser could be seen trailing them, lights off, no sirens. Delmont had followed them for miles before initiating the stop. Premeditated. On another screen he pulled up the audio from his own recording, clear as crystal. Delmont saying, "Make sure she doesn't leave here," thinking, she can mouth off like that again. Dana watched in silence. When the clip ended she exhaled shakily. "You got it all." Anthony nodded. "Everything. But it's not just about exposing them, it's about revealing the system that protected them." Just then his phone vibrated. It was Mendes. "We've got more," the agent said. A whistleblower from inside the sheriff's office. Anonymous but legitimate. They sent documents. Internal discussions about targeting vocal black families ahead of the next election. "It's bigger than Delmont. You were right. She wasn't pulled over for a broken taillight. She was profiled, tracked, and flagged." Anthony didn't speak. His silence was a storm-gathering weight. "They're scared," Mendes continued. "This leak is going to blow the lid off, but they're going to come after you hard." "Ready?" "I've been ready," Anthony said. That night he prepared a press kit. A digital file with every piece of evidence. Timestamps, video, audio, emails. He uploaded it to 3 independent news outlets, all known for investigative reporting, along with the DOJ and a national civil rights organization. Then he made one more file. A public version set to auto-release if anything happened to him or his family. As he clicked upload, he turned to Dana, who had returned to Miles's bedside. "I'm not just fighting this for us anymore," he said. "This is for every family they thought they could disappear in the dark." Dana looked at him, her eyes fierce again. "Then let's drag them into the light. Because when you try to silence the truth, it screams louder. And when you try to hide injustice, you only make it easier to expose." Anthony Brooks knew this now, and soon the whole world would too. The morning that followed was deceptively peaceful. Sunlight stretched across the linoleum floor of the hospital room where Miles finally stirred, his eyelids fluttering, lips dry and trembling. Dana leaned in instantly, brushing his cheek with her fingertips, whispering his name with trembling hope. Anthony stood near the doorway, shoulders square, hands clasped tightly behind his back. He didn't breathe until Miles murmured, "Mom," a single word that shattered the tension like glass. Tears rolled silently down Dana's cheeks as she reassured her son, her voice trembling with love and rage. "You're okay, baby. You're safe. We've got you." But even as they savored the moment, Anthony's mind was 1,000 steps ahead. Because the second Miles opened his eyes, the game changed. Anthony made 2 calls. One to Mendes, who confirmed the DOJ had begun their inquiry, and another to activist journalist Joel Ramsey, who had already gone viral with preliminary leaks from the Brooks case. Now Anthony was ready to give her everything. Not just evidence, but a face, a voice, a father who refused to let America forget what had been done to his son. By noon, Joel arrived at the secure location Anthony had arranged, a small media office hidden in the back of a bookstore in downtown Savannah. She wasn't alone. 2 producers, 1 camera, and a legal advisor from the Southern Justice League accompanied her. Anthony brought the full file. Footage, names, voice recordings, and the community surveillance maps that had silently marked families like his as agitators. Joelle listened, watched, and said nothing at first. Then slowly she raised her head. "They're going to come after you," she said. "This will bury careers, end funding streams. It's not just local anymore. This is political." Anthony's voice was calm. "Then we don't wait for them to react. We strike first." At his insistence, they aired a teaser that afternoon. A 90-second segment showing footage of Dana's arrest, cut with audio from Clay Delmont's body mic where he sneered, "Let her squirm. She thinks someone's coming to save her." The video was shared 300,000 times in 6 hours. Across the country, people stopped scrolling. They started listening. But Anthony wasn't done. That evening, he and Dana stood in front of a camera, seated side by side, hands intertwined. Dana's bruises were still healing, but she didn't flinch as she told the story of that night. Not as a victim, but as a mother who had survived. Anthony followed with a statement that was both warning and invocation. If you're watching this and you've ever been told to comply and be grateful, to stay quiet and stay small, know this. That silence you carry was their plan. But our voices were made for more. We're not asking for vengeance. We're demanding reckoning. The full story dropped that night, headlining, Systemic Silence, What They Tried to Hide in Chatham County. The exposé lit a match beneath City Hall, and Anthony knew what came next wouldn't be polite hearings and PR spin. It would be retaliation. By dawn, his family had been moved under protection. Their home had been ransacked in the night. Drawers torn open, files gone. But nothing critical had been left behind. It was a warning shot, a last-ditch effort to intimidate. Anthony didn't blink. They came for us, he told Mendes later that morning, but they underestimated the cost. Then came the call Anthony had been anticipating since this began. A member of the sheriff's department, anonymous at first, agreed to meet. A young deputy named Rylan Price. She had worked under Delmont. She knew about Silent Guard. And she was ready to talk. Anthony met her in a small empty church basement near the edge of the city. Dana came too, against his initial instinct, but with her resolve sharper than ever. Rylan sat across from them, eyes wary but determined. They recruited us like it was community service, she said. Told us we were protecting our own from urban decay. They used language that sounded official, necessary. But it was always black families. Always people like you. She brought proof. Signed memos, group chat screenshots from inside the force. Meeting schedules that listed aggressive visibility missions. It was all there, cold, calculated, bureaucratically sanitized racism. Dana stared at the papers and whispered, they had a playbook. Rylan looked at her, guilt swimming in her eyes. They told me to stop asking questions or they'd label me next. I couldn't live with that, not after what they did to your son. Anthony leaned forward. We're going public with your testimony. You understand the risk. Rylan nodded slowly. But you're not the only family they targeted. Someone has to be first. That night, Anthony received word from Mendes. The DOJ would be issuing subpoenas. Internal affairs from Atlanta were en route. But it wouldn't be enough if they waited for the legal system to grind into motion. The department would destroy evidence, intimidate witnesses. They needed something bigger. So Anthony called every ally he had left. Activists, veterans, reporters, clergy. A press conference was set for the courthouse steps. And not just for Dana, not just for Miles, but for every mother who'd been told to sit quietly in the back of the courtroom while her son's name was dragged through the mud. For every father who buried his anger to keep his family safe. The city prepared for rain that next morning. The courthouse lawn was wet with dew, the sky heavy with gray, but hundreds showed up, with signs, with stories, with voices. Cameras lined the sidewalk, reporters filled the lot. Anthony took the podium. Dana stood beside him, one hand resting on Miles's shoulder. He sat in a wheelchair, weak but awake and alive. Behind them, Rylan Price waited with her folder of damning evidence. Anthony didn't shout. He didn't cry. He simply spoke. They tried to hide it. They tried to erase our names. But we are still here. And we are not going without a fight.